Hello there, you're watching Context Special. I'm Orkun Amashev here to ask relevant and pertinent questions in pursuit of illuminating and elucidating answers. As the 80th session of the UN General Assembly begins in New York this week, some of the world's most intractable issues are once again in the spotlight. Lebanon is not at the center of the agenda in its own right, but it is inextricably bound up with a wider Middle Eastern situation that continues to command attention. In September 2025, Lebanon is no longer quite as troubled as it was before the beginning of this year. In early 2025, the country had no president, only a caretaker government, and was mired in deep paralysis. But on the 9th of January, Parliament elected Joseph Aoun as president, and he in return appointed Nawaf Salam as prime minister, who later went on to form a full government, no longer a caretaker government. That particular impasse was resolved, and Lebanon today is more normal than it was at the start of the year. But what does normality mean in this particular case, and is it normal enough? And the actual crisis endures. Hezbollah's role continues to cast a long shadow. Border issues with Syria are still there, and they are quite daunting. And the ceasefire of the 27th of November has not been fully implemented, with Israel having not fully withdrawn from the south of the Litani River. And the reverberations of the war in Gaza have further paralyzed Lebanese politics and society. A nation still in flux, troubled, yet with glimmers of hope. Joining me now to discuss Lebanon's evolving situation and wider regional dynamics in the context of this week's 80th session of the UN General Assembly is Arthur Bloch, Editor-in-Chief of Die Liberum. Arthur, what a great delight to welcome you to the studio. Thank you very much for making this discussion possible.
Thank you so much for having me, Orhan. It's always an honor and a pleasure for me to be here and part of ANew's growing success.
Thank you, Arthur. Naturally, when we talk, we always concentrate on Lebanon, where you're from originally,
correct,
of course, and you're based in Beirut. But let's talk about this 80th session of UN General Assembly, which has just kicked off in New York City. Does it look like to you, from perspective of Lebanon, as a congregation which results in nothing, or is it something very consequential?
What you mean about Lebanon, or as it happened yesterday evening?
In the wider sense of the word, well, and in relation to many other issues, including
Lebanon. Of course, it's a show. It's an interesting show to watch. And yesterday evening I saw the live feed here on ANews and saw the Jordanian president, and I saw let's say the confirmation of Palestine as a state, and that was quite interesting to see. And I don't know really what it means in practice, but it is definitely interesting to observe that there's more states and nations now that are saying, well.
So you kind of concur with my guest yesterday, with Ken, who described the meeting jointly convened by France and Saudi Arabia on the implementation of two-state solution as a massive, big theater. Do you concur with this assessment?
Well, in the end, it is a theater, of course. United Nations has proven itself in the past 50, 60 years that it's a good institute to put things on the agenda, but there's 5 permanent members who have a veto right, so nothing really gets done if there's no consensus. And this is a very nice symbolic gathering. And I heard Ken analyzing yesterday what happened, and in a way he is right. There were many chances at the inception of of Israel. There was a two-state plan on the table. The Arab states rejected that, and then there were the wars in the 60s, 70s, and all the problems in between. And well, it's a small step towards the establishment of a state. There's more recognition now of the Palestinian state, but in the end, what does it mean really?
We'll come back to the point regarding the recognition of the Palestinian state in September 2025 by a number of countries, including UK, France, New Zealand, Australia and others. But now let's focus on Lebanon. Lebanon does not seem to occupy the central stage. It's sort of a concomitant of the wider picture wherein Palestine, Israel are the key linchpins. In September 2025, do you agree with my introduction that Lebanon, for all of its problems, which are still there, is in a much better state than it was in early 2025?
Well, let's say it's in a bit better state than it was. I mean, we're taking very small steps at a time. We have now a government, a president, some kind of unity, but we're not there yet. Lebanon is in a complete state of crisis. There's a non-working banking system. There's hyperinflation. People are still suffering the consequences of that. And then, of course, there's the sword of Damocles hanging above society concerning the weapons of Hezbollah, what to do with it, how to disarm. There seemed to be some form of consensus in the government, at least, to disarm.
Yeah.
But how? I mean,
we're
not there yet. It's a big step.
Where are we regarding the implementation of the 27th of November ceasefire deal?
Well, you could say that some steps have been taken. The army has been taking over, the Lebanese army has been taking over positions south of the Litani River. But of course, Israel is still occupying some parts, some 5, if I'm correct now. And it's a cat and a mouse game. It's like a circle where we're in. Israel says, well, as long as the army does not take the weapons from Hezbollah, we're going to stay. And Hezbollah says, well, as long as Israel's there, we're not going to give away our weapons. And there's not really any, let's say, bonus for them to do so, to comply with it. Because
now that Israel has a president appointed by the parliament, or elected by the parliament, as a proper kind of government appointed by the president, do you think the chances of the implementation of that deal is higher than it was when we had a chat last time?
Look, if you look at Joseph Aoun, he was army commander. Yeah. Strong individual, strong character, charismatic, good government with a prime minister that you know is basically on the same page as he is. And I expect a lot from him. I do not expect magic because the Lebanese army is under-equipped. And there's all the religious sect that we have in Lebanon also present in the army. And then, of course, there's the people. They are not so eager to... No, not all the people I'm speaking on. There's consensus in the government, so to say, to disarm. But the way how it's going to happen is a bit unclear. There's like 2.5 months left, and I think they have until the end of the year to get it done. And Israel's already threatening if it's not done properly, then you will see what are going to be the consequences. And it's very difficult because you cannot just go in people's houses and as army say, well, you know, here with your weapons, and you get nothing in return. There should be some kind of, I don't know, clear plan worked out and presented. So this is the path we're going to take, and this is how we're going to get there.
What is the perception of Israeli threat in Lebanese society now?
Yeah, but it depends where you ask.
Well, when you ask in Beirut, for example.
Well, you ask in Beirut, like Beirut is
people
also...
People close to the president, they say.
Well, the president is quite popular, I have to say. Even that there's any polls that can back that up, but that's the impression I get. Yep. And Lebanon is segregated. There's many different religions, so it's not like Azerbaijan, where you have one dominating religion, and we have Christian, Muslim, and different faction of that. And it depends where you ask, how you ask the question to see the answer. People are not eager to sign a peace agreement with Israel, but a lot of people, I mean, they feel that it's time for maybe a normalization of the relation between the countries. We cannot continue in a status of ongoing war and crisis, because that's what has been the status quo of the past, let's say, 30 years after the end of the war. And it leads nowhere. It leads to stress.
Do you think that to a certain extent this abnormality which you described, this continuation of the state of war, has become normalized and people are kind of accustomed to it now?
Yeah, well, let's look things from perspective. So Lebanon it's a weak state. And when the war ended, that was a consensus. Saudi Arabia got involved and put people on the table and said, listen, we have to have some kind of agreement. They decided to disarm all the militias except for Hezbollah. They were designated to liberate Lebanon from the last Israeli occupation. Now that lasted until 2000, and basically they kept their weapons while there was no more reason to keep them, and that got us into a few wars. In 2006 there was a escalation and it completely destroyed Lebanon and its infrastructure. Then we had a political stalemate, and then we had another after the events in October 2023 in Israel. Hezbollah signed up for another round of fighting, and that basically came with a high price for them.
Let's try to understand what's happening in Lebanon in the context of this UN General Assembly, which is currently underway. Yeah. Today is day one of the High Week. It started actually early September, the 80th session of UN General Assembly. This week we have sort of a High Week with heads of government state arriving in New York, and with many presidents and prime ministers being there already. Question is, one of the key points is Syria. Stable, secure Syria is key. United States of America is an important part of the discussion and debate there. To what extent it's relevant to the fate of Lebanon to have a proper Syria? Because one of the discussions preceding this UN General Assembly was about border issues that exist between Syria and Lebanon up until now.
Well, the border demarcation has never been properly done, one. Second, we have a bit of a, let's say, complicated relationship with Syria. It was always, if you simplify matters, there's always been two camps in Lebanon, one pro-Western camp and one camp that looks eastwards, which contains Hezbollah.
Could you elaborate on those two camps?
Yeah, well, so when Syria was under the reign of the Assad family, they had their favorable parties in Lebanon. Hezbollah was one of them, and then you had the Amal party, and there were some, let's say, individual candidates or small parties that were also pro-Syrian, so to say. And pro-Syrian meant anti-American, anti-Western, and that collapsed. And
that's practically one third of society.
Well, it's difficult to say, basically.
Difficult to say, but roughly.
Yeah. And that maybe actually at that time when Assad was still there, I would say half.
And dominant in the parliament?
Well, if you look at Hezbollah's current presence in the parliament, we're talking about 15 seats out of 128, so it's not significant, but still the ideology, the ideas that they advocate is that it's can find support under basically all people from all different backgrounds, religious and social.
Yes.
So and if you look at Syria now, it's a decisive moment. I mean, if you look what happened in the coastal regions with the Alawites massacred, in the south next to the Israeli border, the Druze massacred almost until Israel intervened to prevent that. And I think they are barely in control, the central government. And it's not a government in a sense that they have control over the country or know what's happening. You have at the Lebanese-Syrian border, things are happening. It's a bit, well, not say a state of chaos, but it could decline, could implode.
Well, it would be fair to say that current Syria under Ahmed al-Shara is in a much better state than it was under Bashar al-Assad.
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No.
You question this argument. You say that actually under Ahmed al-Shara, Syria has gone worse. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, look what's happening on the ground. The people are being massacred.
But was it better before 8th of December 2024?
Well, it is a very complicated question. I mean,
because
was
it's very relevant
to better?
Lebanon.
Listen, was it better? Yes and no. There was some form of stability, and I think the problem that the Arab leaders made was not to get Bashar al-Assad on board. And he, in the end, is Arab, and he was looking to Iran for basically support and protection. And I think the biggest mistake that the Arab states made collectively was not to keep him on board, so to say. So they drove him in the hands of, well, I'm not saying the enemy, but a different kind of ideology. Well, in the end, Syria and Lebanon, they're connected there. I mean, if you look at the ancient history, it used to be one country, a Greater Syria, that was an Ottoman protectorate, and then Mount Lebanon, the Lebanon that we know right now, was a small part of that, a bit more westernized because of the region where it was located.
There's different demographics back
definitely,
then.
Definitely. But if you look at the coastal regions of Syria, there's a lot of similarities with Lebanon.
I recall during our last interview you saying that Israel was meant to be a Jewish state, and Lebanon was meant to be a Christian state in the Middle East. But currently the demographics do not allow.
In a nutshell, we had the last census, I believe, in 1937.
Yeah.
And even then they played around a bit, they fiddled the figures, so to say. They didn't allow some groups, often Shia groups, not to participate in the census, so they...
It's very interesting that in the context of the creation of the State of Israel, there was a problem of ensuring Jewish majority, because we all recall from history that in 1947, when that UN partition vote took place, the Jewish population of Palestine, the former mandate, constituted 1/3 of the population, whereas Arabs 2/3 of that population, whereas Jews were given 55% of the territory. And there, within that 55% of the Palestinian mandate, Jews constituted majority, but slim majority, whereas in the Arab part of that mandate, Arabs constituted overwhelming majority. There was always problem sort of getting numbers right, ensuring that presence. It looks like that modern Lebanon is facing that sort of challenge, because currently the Christian population of Lebanon would account for the 40% of the population, if I'm not wrong. Is that the case?
Well, there has never been a census ever since, so it's an estimation.
There was never a Christian majority in Lebanon then, right?
Well,
like overwhelming majority, over 50%.
I can answer that. So
please do.
When the modern Lebanon was created, so to say, in the 1920s, and there was like the Mount Lebanon, the great area, was mainly Christian and Druze. Now, the founders of the current Lebanese state, so to say, were a bit eager in that way to include Tripoli, city in the north, to include Saida and Tyre in the south, which mainly consisted of Sunni and Shia Muslims.
Yeah.
Also, there were Christians, but they were less. So they basically, like they played a bit with the census to have an argument to divide it 50-50. Everything is 50% Christian, 50% Muslim. So in a way that shaped Lebanon's identity, and that also gave a lot of, let's say, progression to the Islamic communities in the country. They became more modern, so to say, than what happened in Syria. So it is difficult to answer that question clearly, but at this moment, definitely, in Lebanon, the Christians are not in a majority anymore. But you have to also take the
Were they ever
diaspora.
majority? Were they ever majority?
Well, I doubt that.
You doubt it?
Yeah. Because many of the Shias, for example, who came from a lot of areas in the Middle East where they were persecuted, they found safe haven in the shores of Lebanon. They were seen as refugees, so they were not counted. So at that time already, I think when the census was done, it was clear.
Let's return to the subject of Syria. You said something quite extraordinary. You said that under Bashar al-Assad this was sort of better than now it is under Ahmed al-Shara. Of course, it's a comment which needs to be dissected properly. We need to look at what it really meant.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't fall into the vulgar generalization, which you would detest yourself. I've no doubt about that. But Turkey is a strong supporter of the current government in Damascus. United States of America looks very positively at Ahmed al-Shara. President Trump likes Ahmed al-Shara. Tom Barrack consistently supports, as U.S. envoy, this government in Damascus.
Correct.
Azerbaijan plays its own role. There was an energy project. Azerbaijan has a role to play. There are a number of... Saudi Arabia is very positive about Syria. There are a number of countries which support Ahmed al-Shara and say the following. They say that this is the best possible hope for Syria, and if there is a united, integrated, prosperous Syria, it will be also very good for the administration in Beirut, for the government of Lebanon.
Yeah.
Do you disagree with this proposition?
Well, listen, let me first get back to what you said about that things were better under Bashar al-Assad. Well, there was some form of stability. There was one army, and of course, there was since 2011 up until the fall of the Assad regime, it declined. And that's because of a lot of external powers tried to break his regime, basically. The army, they supported the opposition. America has, of course, butts on the head, so does Turkey. They all played their own role until it collapsed. And then Ahmed al-Shara came, who has a $10 million US bounty still on his head, don't get me wrong, because of the atrocities that he committed and the militia that he headed. So let's not pretend that he's some kind of savior and that he holds the future of Syria in his hands. This is just an interim solution. Syrians are not really happy with that because look what's happening there. It's like, if you look at it from the perspective of what we're going to create a strong Sunni state, well, maybe an Islamic strong...
Is this a perspective of your own? Is it your personal view?
Yeah, also what you pick up in the media, of course.
Dominant and pervasive is this point of view, your point of view, which does not seem to favor Ahmed al-Shara and contradicts the views expressed by many others in Turkey and other parts of the world.
But they have an interest in him.
How pervasive this view in Lebanon?
Well, we in Lebanon it's difficult because we are depending basically on Syria. So if it collapses in Syria, and the Islamists will take over and things escalate further, what you saw in the coastal regions in the Druze areas, then who's going to help Lebanon? The army is not strong enough to put all the troops on the border.
Are you effectively saying the strong government of Ahmed al-Shara is a danger to Beirut?
Well, it depends how it develops. I think it's time that Syria is going to organize elections. And then, because he's an interim leader that came to power in a questionable way. What exactly happened? I remember there was a ceasefire signed on Tuesday in Lebanon. Thursday, it started in Syria, and Monday, the week after, Assad was in Moscow, and all of a sudden everybody was applauding al-Shara for his great victory.
Now, that was very quick, of course.
Yeah, very quick, within a week.
I mean, unexpected, really unexpected.
Talking about circus.
Yes, indeed.
It was a spectacle, it was a show, but it was, of course, orchestrated from across the border. And I don't know the fine details of that, and it's not up to me to analyze it that way.
No one doubts that there was an element of external intervention and external support for Ahmed al-Shara. Yeah. It's a question of whether it's good for Syria or not, and people disagree about that. And you have your own point of view. Just want to reflect.
I'm not so happy.
I fully understand what you say. Let's talk about this week's UN General Assembly. the question of Palestine, the peaceful resolution of the Palestinian question, the necessity of recognizing state of Palestine, however symbolic and formal, these elements dominate the landscape there. Does it really matter to recognize state of Palestine today, you think? Because there's nothing to recognize. There's in the West Bank there is a Palestinian sort of administration, but it is not a state structure really. It's some element of bureaucracy, but nothing ready for sovereignty. Gaza is in shambles, no doubt about that. What is the point of recognizing now, you think?
Well, they're in the worst state ever, so to say, and it is very regrettable to see the destruction and the suffering of the people. And I don't really know what is the plan. It's clear that Netanyahu is going to continue as long as it takes to wipe out all the Hamas infrastructures. It's also evident that the hostages will never be returned. Well, they might be, but definitely not alive. That's my personal opinion. And Hamas is going kamikaze, going all in. I don't think they really care if there's any recognition of the state or not, because they are in a war. And I don't know what is the solution. I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't think it will be, let's say, very challenging to found a Palestinian state. I don't know how that could ever be viable with a piece of West Bank, and then you have. I mean, I don't even see it. I don't see it happening. And the fact that there's now,
I think many analysts and statesmen are focusing on creating this legal framework by means of diplomatic recognition, which will commit the State of Israel eventually, or compel the State of Israel eventually, to recognize State of Palestine at a later stage. Because the prevailing impression seems to be that Israel is doing its level best to change the circumstance on the ground in such a way that even if there is a formal recognition, eventually and ultimately there will be nothing to recognize, because there will be no Palestinians left in Gaza. The West Bank will be completely shambles. There will be nothing to recognize there. And this must be stopped, because Israel is doing something which may have irreversible consequences.
Well,
do you see the value of this recognition in that context?
Well, in that context, definitely. I mean, it recognizes. I mean, but if you look in the modern history, it happened a few times before that there was recognition, there was a lot of debate, and how is the state going to? What's going to be? Is it ever going to be a viable state? And what's happening right now? You analyze it quite well. There's nothing left. What is there left, basically? So, and I don't really know what is the plan behind it. And even though there is recognition, what is there to recognize? And what's going to happen to the people?
The British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer that we recognise the State of Palestine to keep the hope for a two-state solution alive. So it just gives
that hypocrite to say that from the British perspective.
Why hypocrite? And Britain played an important role in terms of recognising State of Israel, in terms of actually making State of Israel possible, in view of what happened in 1917 and the Jewish immigration of 1920s and 30s. And there's a natural obligation to recognise the State of Palestine, which should have been created in 1947.
I would say too little, too late. I mean, what's the point now? It looks quite nice if you want to satisfy the public opinion, and if you want to show, look, now we are, but why now? Why not 2 years ago? Why not 10 years ago? I mean, then the situation was much better, and it would have been possible to create some kind of authority on the ground.
Talking about why not 2 years ago, there are those people who are strongly of the opinion that this recognition constitutes a reward for Hamas, say that without the 7th of October, this recognition would not have happened. What do you make of that link? Because you yourself said, why not 2 years ago?
Yeah, well, you should then ask yourself, from that perspective, you could say, well, then you reward terrorism. You do something terrible, and then shit hits the fan, so to say, and then you get a recognition. So that's a bit.
But my follow-up question is this recognition a reaction to what Israel has been doing in Gaza, in that sense?
Well, yeah, you could argue that that's the case, But in the end, I see it as a lip service. That doesn't really mean anything, because where are they heading to? Is it going to be reoccupied? Basically, de facto, it is reoccupied now, Gaza. I mean, right? There's an ongoing military operation. People are displaced, and I mean, it will lead. Where is it heading to? That's what I want to know. It is some. Nobody really knows, and I think also Netanyahu doesn't really have a plan. He just wants to annihilate Hamas, because that's the promise he made to his electorate, and then what? I don't think there's a plan.
And then what? So after annihilation of of Hamas.
Exactly. Then what do you do? What is there left? There's no more structure, there's no more infrastructure. Most of it is destroyed.
I recall when I interviewed former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak just a few months ago. I think it was immediately on the day when United States of America targeted nuclear sites in Iran. That was on that day that I interviewed him.
The Saturday.
Yes, indeed. And that was probably Sunday already, I think. Well, the fundamental question is, many Israelis are saying that we are not against two-state solution per se, but it's not the right time to talk about it, in particular after 7th of October. But there should be some sort of alternative to Hamas, which may potentially emerge, and then it may create certain state structures in Gaza, and which will eventually, in the fullness of time, may give rise to that two-state solution. And some people believe that this symbolic recognition just acknowledges the mere possibility of that.
Definitely. And that, if you explain it like that, I agree with you. But it also depends a lot on Trump. What is his plan? Because, of course, Israel is America's proxy in the region. I mean, who's picking up the bills for what's happening right now? If you look at the past 2.5 years, it's the American taxpayer who paid for the war. Now, you could ask yourself the question, what is the plan when the military operation is done? Are the people who have the right to return are going to rebuild? But then not with the help of Iran and Iranian money, but with Americans' money. And is it going to be then? Are they going to work towards something viable with with the state of law, and basically a system that people can rely on, that they are not being pushed in the hands of radicalism, but actually have something to live for?
My last question to you, Artem. We're slowly coming to an end of this program. It's going to be about Syria again.
Yeah.
There will be a meeting between Ahmed al-Shara and US President Donald Trump.
Yes.
As you know, Azerbaijan is also involved within the process, which could widely be described as bringing Syria back in from the cold. So investment into Syria is being made. How hopeful are you that, for all the misgivings that you and other people may have about Ahmed al-Shara, with the right attitude and with this Abrahamic Accords being properly augmented, Syria could become a normal sort of a partner for Israel in the fullness of time? Because there are some incentives, and we have noticed some elements associated with Ahmed al-Shara which are really quite promising when it comes to normalizing relations with Israel eventually, despite the ongoing illegal occupation of Golan Heights.
It's always better to try to get somebody on the table, and a lot of it will depend on the position of Saudi Arabia. There's some red lines for Saudi Arabia. For Mohammed bin Salman said it himself. I mean, a reoccupation of Gaza is a red line for us. So if you want Syria to be normal, it's good, as you say, to invest and to be present, but you need all the, let's say, large Arabic states on board, so it can become normal. And the only way to solve the problems in Syria is to work towards new elections and to let's say, get the army back on track so they can actually play the role that they should play, not to fight and to kill minorities, but to actually make Syria great again.
Thank you. Thank you, Artem. I'm so grateful to you for your time. As long as Lebanon is concerned, still a nation in flux, but there was a glimmer of hope.
Definitely.
Thank you very much. I'm most grateful to you. But I just conversed with Artur Blok, editor-in-chief of the Liberum. We discussed a wide range of issues, largely, of course, centered on this week's high-level week of the 80th session of the UN General Assembly. There's a particular focus on the state of affairs revolving around Lebanon as a concomitant of the wider Middle Eastern issue, the question of the recognition of Palestine, and many other dynamics of great import. You've been watching Context, and see you very soon indeed.